Guten Tag. Now I will apologize because that is actually the extent of my German. When I go to non-English speaking countries, the first thing I try to do is learn how to say I'm sorry in whatever the language is, because I'm usually leading most conversations with an apology. I've found that here in Germany and in German I can't even quite get to I'm sorry, so maybe one of you can teach me later how to apologize. Thanks very much for having me here today. Thank you to Frank and Dirk for the invitation. Very pleased to be here at Programmatic Audio Day. I'll be speaking a little bit more broadly on the state of the industry. Most of what I'll show you today, actually all of what I'll show you is very US-centric data, but it's about the online audio industry more broadly. We'll touch on some trends in the audience, trends in revenue. We'll look at how this compares to over-the-air radio, and then we'll get into a preview of some data points from the infinite dial. Have heard of the infinite dial? So infinite dial is now a 20-year-old study that we've been partnered with Edison Research on in the United States. It's a tracking study of media usage and consumption, and we'll be releasing the full data next week, but I'll give you a bit of a preview today. So first, just a moment on Triton Digital and who we are. Triton is a 12-year-old company. We're a technology company based in the US, but serving digital audio publishers globally. We create tools that digital audio companies use to reach their audience and to serve their advertisers. So content distribution, we have a big audio distribution network, advertising technology, both ad serving and programmatic audio capabilities. In fact, it's interesting to note here at Programmatic Audio Day that Triton actually conducted the first programmatic audio transaction just over 5 years ago. Actually, it was January of 2013 when, with our partner, Xaxis, we actually launched the first programmatic audio campaign. So now, some 5 years later, it's nice to hear that, or see that the industry is really maturing and programmatic audio is becoming much more mainstream. The other business that Triton is in is audience measurement. So we measure the audiences to streaming audio publishers. In fact, it's the thing we are most well known for. Some of you may be familiar with these rankers that we publish every month, showing the top 20 publishers in internet radio. We do a global version, a US version, we now do a Latin American version, and we'll be launching 2 other regions later this year. Even though we're only showing the top 20 on our rankers, we actually work with many, many more companies. In fact, we work with most of the largest broadcasters in the United States, in Canada, many of the largest broadcasters around the world, and the leading music services such as Spotify, Pandora, and others. Because we work with so many people in the ecosystem, we actually say we have 50-yard line seats, which, because I'm in Germany today, we're translating to we have midfield seats. I know the US football is probably not as big here as it is in New York. in New York. So we have midfield seats. We have a midfield view of the industry. So now let's get into some of the data. This is audience growth in online audio. This is a US number. This is US concurrent listening, Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., so daytime listening only on this particular chart, growing 681% since 2009. You can see how this has been growing so rapidly. This part here, that's Spotify coming into the market with mobile, right? And it's hard to follow Spotify. They always have such good presentations. It's like when you're in the entertainment business, don't follow the animal actor Spotify. 5.6 million people listening to online audio in the United States in the middle of the day. So the natural question then is, how does that compare to broadcast? Because that's sort of the medium we're much more familiar with. So in order to compare streaming to broadcast, I had to have a broadcast number. Now, Nielsen Audio measures broadcast in the States. They don't give us their data, but I had some publicly available stuff to compare to. So this is persons 12 plus. It's a 6 a.m. to midnight number, Monday to Sunday, when Nielsen Audio tells us 26.9 million people are listening to over-the-air radio. At that same time, that same day part, same demo, 4.1 million people listening to streaming audio in the US. So today, 13% of the audio consumption, the live audio consumption in the US is online through IP-delivered channels. That number is actually higher, though, because Triton doesn't measure everybody. As much as we like to think we're the authoritative voice in terms of measurement of audiences, and we are. We just don't capture absolutely everything out there. And probably the most notable publisher that we don't is SoundCloud. And if you were to add the SoundCloud audiences in here, that number is probably more like 15%, maybe 16%. So you can see a really meaningful percentage of the audience to audio is listening to audio on IP-delivered channels as opposed to over the air through a tower and an AM/FM receiver. So what follows audience? Advertising. Now let's talk about the revenue. This is data from the IAB in the US. 2016, first half of 2016, $425 million flowing into digital audio in the US. During that same period in 2017, $603 million, 42%, pacing ahead 42%, 2016 to 17. Now the IAB hasn't released their full year 2017 data yet, but if you take that 42% pacing and apply it to the full year 16 number, that means digital audio is going to be a $1.6 billion business in the US in 2017. And everybody believes that that pacing actually accelerated throughout the year. So that 1.6 is probably conservative. It'll be fascinating to see what it is in 2018. So not only is audio's revenue rising in absolute numbers, but it's rising in terms of share as well. In 2016, digital audio took 1.3% share of digital advertising in the US. In 2017, 1.5%. Excuse me. So again, that begs the question, how does it compare to broadcast radio? Broadcast radio in the US is a $17.2 billion business in 2017. Taking the $1.6 billion that the IAB is predicting, that means digital audio has an 8% share of the audio advertising market in the US. That number, though, actually might be a bit bigger, because in that $17.2 billion number from broadcast radio is about $400 million of streaming audio revenue. So if you were to take that 400 from the orange slice and put it in the blue slice, digital is now $2 billion out of this marketplace, and probably around 10% share of the revenue. So now let's dive into the infinite dial. As I mentioned earlier, the infinite dial is about 20 years old this year. This year will be the 20th anniversary. It's a tracking study of consumption and usage of media, social media, broadcast media, online media. The survey is conducted every year by interviewing about 2,000 people. It's a telephone interview, and it's done with random digit dialing, so we capture cell phone users as well. Many survey methodologies don't include cell phones in the US, which is a problem. So we capture everybody. We've been in the US for 20 years. We launched Australia last year, and we're launching Canada this year. In fact, the field work's done. We'll be presenting the Canadian data in about 2 months. The full US version of the infinite dial will be presented next Thursday. Excuse me. So whenever we do the infinite dial, the very first thing I do is I look for the big surprise. We go through the data, say, what's the most surprising fact? Well, this was the most surprising fact this year. The use of Facebook has declined for the first time ever, at least in the tracking in the infinite dial study. And this was fascinating. I guess at some point you can't grow any further, but in the case of Facebook, they've now actually started to decline a bit. Well, where's that? What's happening? Well, the big winner there is Snapchat, right? And if you were to slice this decline into the demos, it's younger people who are leaving Facebook and spending more time on other social media. Luckily for those of us in the audio business, audio consumption is going the other way. 64% of Americans 12 plus now consume digital audio, online audio, internet-delivered audio, monthly. And if we were to look at that on a weekly basis, it'd be well above 50% at this point. So what are they listening to? I apologize for the crudeness of this chart, but what this shows you is year over year, 2017 to 2018, people who said they use a service most often. The big winner in this past year, 17 to 18, was Apple Music. They grew the most by far. Amazon next, Google after that, Spotify after that. If we extended this screen down here, you'd see the losers, right? Because there are losers as well. You'll have to attend the full presentation next week to see who lost. And I'll give you the registration date at the end. So now let's talk a little bit about the hardware in radio. So this is a comparison of the number of radios people own in their homes 10 years ago versus today. The top bar tells us that 31% owned 4 or more radios, 65% 1 to 3 radios, and back in 2008, 4% of the population had no broadcast radio receiver in their home. Today, 10 years later, that's 29%. 29% of Americans don't have a radio in their home. Now, if we slice that into the demos, let's go to and look at 18 to 34. 15% of people in this younger demo do not own a broadcast radio in their home. And it's hard to buy a broadcast radio. It's hard to buy a radio by itself. Radios seem to come in other things, whether it's a toaster or a car, they seem to come in other things. So broadcast radio has a hardware problem, right? Broadcast radio has a hardware problem. The upside, though, are these things: smart speakers. Today, 39 million Americans own smart speakers, a meaningful percentage of the population, 16%. That's up from 7% a year ago. And I saw Susanna's numbers earlier saying 53 million will be shipped this year, so clearly that number is going to keep going up rapidly. For the first time now, people are putting radios on their kitchen counters again, or in their living rooms. Just like when we got our mobile phones, we put radios back in our pocket for the first time probably since the 60s. We now have this consumption device for radio back in the middle of our living spaces. And when people get these devices, the first thing they tell us is, I listen to more audio. 70% of the owners of smart speakers tell us they listen to more audio. 65% say they listen to more music, 28% more news and talk programming, 20% are listening to more podcasts, and 18% are listening to more audiobooks, but I don't care because they don't have advertising in them. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to present this stuff to you. For more information from the Infinite Dial, next Thursday on the 8th at 1900 GMT, 2 o'clock in New York, we'll be presenting all of the data from this year. You can register at edisonresearch.com. I hope you will. And I'll be around throughout the day if you want to talk about any more of this stuff or anything else. Please don't hesitate to say hi. Thank you again.